Erev Tov Rabotai, we're continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Sheviit. We're up to Perek Dal, Mishnah Zayin. Today's Mishnah should be Leilu Nishmat, Neria ben Tzvelana, Aran Bayit, Menuchato Began Eden, Amen. Rabotai, is an introduction. The Torah tells us in Sefer Vayikra, chapter 25, Pasuk 6, regarding the laws of Shemitah. Vayta Shabbat Haaretz Lechem Leochla, the uncultivated produce of the land shall be for you to eat, which means, the Mefarshim explained, the Torah is teaching us that produce of Shemitah is only a person's to eat, but not to waste. Therefore, a person can pick and eat Shemitah produce only after it has reached the stage of ripeness at which it would normally be eaten. But picking the produce any earlier is asur, because eating it then would be considered wasting it. So the Mishnah now is going to cite applications for this rule. From when can we eat fruits of the tree on Shemitah? Meaning, at what stage of ripeness do they become permitted? And the reason the Mishnah specifically says fruits of the tree is because the Chachamim prohibited eating vegetables and grains that grew on Shemitah. We are only allowed to eat fruits of the tree. This we're going to discuss more later on in chapter 9. So again, at what stage of ripeness do the fruits of the tree become permitted? The Mishnah says, Hapagim, in the case of unripe figs, Mishi Yazrichu, once they turn red, Ochel ben pito basadeh, a person can eat them with the bread in his field, because at this point, they are edible enough to be eaten in the field, but a person cannot bring them into his home and eat them there because they're not yet fully edible. What does this mean? The Mefarshim explain that when a fig turns red, it's a sign that they have begun to ripen. People would snack on them in the field with bread, but they wouldn't bring it into their houses as part of a regular meal. Therefore, a person can only eat this type of figs in the field because that is a normal way of eating them, but you cannot bring them into your house. And the Rav brings, the Yerushalmi learns this from two different psukim. One pasuk says, Tieh kol tivota le'echol, all the grain shall be for yours to eat, all the produce. Another pasuk says, Mina sadeh tuchlu tivota, from the field, eat the produce, right? So the Rav says, Bishtet tivota ketub medaber. The pasuk is talking about two different types of produce. One you eat in the field, and one you eat at home. We look at what stage it is, where it's normally eaten. Bichalu, however, once the figs grew large, you can even bring it into your house and eat them because now they're fully edible. And figs like this, meaning figs that became large, they are subject to tithing to masrot in the other years of the 7-year cycle. And Tachshim explained, we know produce that grows in Eretz Yisrael has to be tithed, meaning you have to separate the trumot, either the 1 to 2% to the Kohen and the masrot, the 10% to the Levi before you eat it. However, produce only becomes obligated in separating masrot. You become obligated to separate masrot from your produce only once it ripens significantly. That's called onat masrot, the time for tithing. If you picked produce before then, you're never obligated to separate tumot and masrot. The Mishnah is teaching us that when figs reach their full size, at which point people even eat them in their homes, they begin being subject to the obligation to be tithed. Now, the reason the Mishnah spoke about the other 6 years, because we know the obligation to tithe Trumot and Masrot only applies during the first 6 years of the 7-year Shemitah cycle. On Shemitah itself, on the 7th year, there's no tithing obligation because all produce is ownerless. There's no owner. That is Rabotai Mishnah Zayin. Mishnah Chet will discuss again the different stages of grapes. Haboser, in the case of unripe grapes, Mishevim Mayim, once they can produce juice, when you squeeze them, Ochel po pito basar, you can eat them with this bread in the field, but you cannot bring them into the home and eat them there. Hiv ish, however, once they were be'usha, which Mefarshim explain, once grapes have reached the stage at which they can be eaten in a normal way, that's called be'usha. When a grape reaches this level, its skin becomes somewhat transparent and the seeds can be seen from the outside. Now, usually the word be'usha refers to grapes of an inferior quality, but here we're using it to signify grapes that have ripened to the point that if you leave it much longer on the vine, it will start deteriorating. So again, the Mishnah says, Hivish, once they become be'usha, once they reach this point where they eat normally, you can even bring it into your home and eat it there. And again, grapes like these, ripe grapes, they're subject to tithing in the other years of the 7-year cycle. Not obviously on the year of Shemitah itself, but on the first 6 years of the 7-year cycle. That is in Rabotai, today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai Le'olam, Amen v'Amen.